President Muhammadu Buhari signs the 2022 Appropriation Bill as lawmakers focus on implementation. The Electoral Act Amendment Bill is still raising questions. On the program today, I will be joined by the spokesman of the Senate as he attempts to provide answers. This is the Hallowed Chambers. I am Sujesu Adeyu. President Muhammadu Buhari has signed a new spending plan for the country in 2022. The 17 trillion naira budget is higher of the total estimate of the 16 trillion naira budget proposed by the federal government. The National Assembly is relying on the expected increase in revenue and the sale of crude oil at $62 per barrel to fund the budget.
186.53 billion naira of the increase, however, came from additional critical expenditures that I had authorized the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning to forward to the National Assembly. The Minister will provide the public the details of the budget as passed by the National Assembly and signed into law by me. As I mentioned during the presentation of the 2022 Appropriation Bill, the fiscal year 2022 is very crucial in our efforts to complete and put to use critical agenda projects, as well as improve the general living conditions of our people. It is in this regard that I must express my reservations about many of the changes that the National Assembly has made to the 2022 executive budget proposal. Some of the worrisome changes are as follows. A, increase in projected federal government independent revenue by 400 billion naira, the justification for which is yet to be provided to the executive. B, reduction in the provision for sinking fund to retire maturing bonds by 22 billion naira without any explanation. C, reduction of the provisions of the non-regular allowances of the Nigeria Police Force and the Nigerian Navy by 15 billion naira and 5 billion naira respectively. This is particularly worrisome because personnel cost provisions are based on agencies' nominal role and approved salaries and allowances. D, furthermore, an increase of 21.72 billion naira in the overhead budget of some MDAs, while the sum of 1.96 billion naira was cut from the provision for some MDAs without apparent justification. E, increase in the provision for capital spending, excluding capital share and statutory transfer, by a net amount of 575.63 billion naira from 4.89 trillion naira to 5.47 trillion naira. Nonetheless, provisions for some critical projects were reduced. These include 1. Reduction of 12.6 billion naira in the Ministry of Transport's budget for the ongoing rail modernization projects. 2. Reduction of 25.8 billion naira from power sector reform program under the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. And 3. Reduction of 14.5 billion naira from several projects of the Ministry of Agriculture and introducing over 1,500 new projects into the budget of this ministry and its agencies. F, inclusion of new provisions totaling 36.59 billion naira for National Assembly's projects in the service-wide vote, which negates the principle of separation of powers and financial autonomy of the legislative arm of government. G, the changes to the original executive proposal are in the form of new insertions, outright removals, reductions, and or increases in the amounts allocated to projects. I, provisions made for as many as 10,733 projects were reduced, while 6,576 new projects were introduced into the budget by the National Assembly. Reduction in the provisions for many strategic capital projects to introduce empowerment projects. The cuts in the provisions for several of these projects by the National Assembly may render the projects unimplementable or set back their completion, especially some of this administration's strategic project, capital projects.
The driving force is our ability in the National Assembly, in the two chambers, to work very amicably and productively. And then, of course, our ability as a National Assembly, as an institution, to work with the executive arm of government in such a manner that the processing of the budget estimates, as will be led by the President all the time, are done in such a way that every arm of government, all the two arms, participate fully at the appropriate time. You recall that in 2019 December for the budget 2020, Mr. President directed his ministers and chief executive officers of NDS not to travel at all until they defended their budgets. And that, of course, helped us a lot in the National Assembly. So the secret is cooperation, partnership, synergy, and that understanding and mutual respect. And of course, Nigeria is benefiting from that kind of relationship. So that is what, in my judgment and opinion, works for us to be passing the budget at the time that we always feel is the appropriate time, before the end of the year. And of course, Mr. President, congratulations to him for signing the 2022 appropriation bill today. Even though today is the last day of the year, but we have achieved that very significant, important date of signing before the end of the year. And let me also add here that, and this is, I hope doesn't spark any controversy, but it's a reality, it's what I've observed. The ability of the federal government to have its budget passed and signed before the end of the year has made so many states to also work towards achieving that. And by today, you would have noticed that more than half of our states would have signed the budget 2022. And that is the kind of leadership that the federal government is giving to the subnationals. Mr. President is happy with the majority of what the National Assembly has done. And that's the most critical thing that we need to focus on. As for the observations Mr. President has raised, this is a natural and logical tendency between the executive and the legislature. Sometimes our views on certain issues may not be necessarily the same kind of views that the executive would have and hold on any particular matter. So I don't think what the President did by raising some observations as something that we should worry about. I'm happy that the President signed the budget in the first place, and he said he's coming back to the National Assembly to seek for amendments or amendments, and this is natural, logical legislative process. So I'm happy that we have done our own part in our own way. This is based on judgments. When we ask for more resources coming from the independent sources, especially from the government-owned enterprises of about 400 to 500 billion, is because we believe that these government-owned enterprises should contribute even much more. In fact, I hold the opinion that they should have contributed about 1 trillion at least, not 500 billion or so. So I believe that the National Assembly was right in its judgment, but there is nothing wrong in the executive arm of government coming back to the National Assembly to see how we are able to dialogue and go through the process and see where the misunderstanding is. But I don't think that is supposed to be worrisome development for us.
Every year's budget is an improvement on the last one. So the transition budget which the President spoke about, as you heard him earlier, they're even going to bring it earlier in 2023, which gives us ample time, more time to work on it, improve on it, and make it a seamless budget with seamless execution and implementation. I don't think I have a problem with 2023. 2023 budget is going to come, it's going to go, and we're going to work on it just like we've been working on the other budgets.
Joining me on the program is Senator Ajibola Bashir, spokesman of the Senate. It's good to have you on the program. The National Assembly raised projections made by the federal government in the 2022 budget. But what assurances are there to meet these targets and fund the budget at a time when revenue generation has even dropped?
The revenue is actually not dropping. One of the adjustments we made was to look at the benchmark of the price for crude, and we adjusted it upward because of the reality of the economy. You know, it's a question of how you project what will be the benchmark for the oil revenue and what to put, the budget. Then, of course, the exchange rate will also have to be looked at. So in terms of increasing the size of the budget is commensurate with the adjustment made into the price of crude, which we believe is in sync with what's obtainable in terms of appreciation of the price of crude in international oil markets. The president has assented to the bill, and that will mean that we have in 3 consecutive years commitments to our January to December budget cycle. But just for purpose of educating Nigerians, the job of appropriation is that of the National Assembly, is constitutionally guaranteed. What the president brought would at best be called a proposal. So that proposal will have to be examined by the National Assembly through its relevant committees and then decide whether to approve the budget as proposed or made necessary amendments. So what we have done is to make necessary adjustment to the budget in line with what we consider to be in our mandate constitutionally given. So therefore, if the president call it worrisome or otherwise, that is a matter of adjective. But for us, what we have done is to carry out our constitutional mandate of ensuring that we scrutinize, examine the budget and pass what we think will be in the best interest of the nation. And of course, the comments of the president, which appear to be a criticism of the National Assembly, will also go to put a hole in the argument of those that said the 9th Assembly is a rubber stamp assembly.
Just like many Nigerians asking for a brand new electoral act, is the Senate disappointed that President Buhari did not sign the Electoral Act Amendment Bill?
He has exercised his constitutional right to not to give assent to it. And just as I've said, we also have some couple of alternatives that we are considering in terms of responding to it. First and foremost, we have the alternative to abandon the bill. But just as I've said on previous occasions, a lot had gone into the making of the Electoral Act, and there are so many commendable innovations, particularly in terms of introduction of technology and ensuring a more transparent electoral processes, and also reform in the area of grants of election petition. So I think although we have option of going the way of the previous sessions of the National Assembly by abandoning legislation, we will not so abandon. Another alternative that we have is to override the veto, but just as opposed to contrary understanding. Overriding veto is not by way of a resolution or a motion. We have to go back and pass the legislation through appropriate processes and procedure by 2/3 majority of the 2 chambers. That alternative, that option is still on the front burner. Yet another alternative is to amend Section 85 or 87, which is the contentious provision, and then in line with the suggestions that have been made by Mr. President. When you look at the letter sent by Mr. President sent a 19-paragraph letter seeking to be able to convince us as to the plausibility of his contention on the need for us to relook at that provision. So that option is also on the front burner. Yet another alternative is to totally leave the issue of whether primaries are conducted or not to the political party by expunging the relevant provision. So those are the 4 options. So it's not a question of one size fit all solution to the challenge we have. But just as we have stated in our legislative agenda, we are committed to ensuring we have an electoral reform that ensures transparency and integrity of electoral process in Nigeria.
Did the National Assembly fail to do due diligence this time again? Because it appears as if the bill is jinxed and Mr. President rejects it again for the fourth time.
The president did not file oaths. There's a difference between plural and singular. Of a 185 section legislation, the president only had issue with one section. So if we are going to apportion mark for work that have been done on that legislation, definitely the National Assembly and necessary stakeholders got a clear distinction in doing a very thorough job on that legislation. So if in a 185 legislation with some schedules, the only issue has to do with only a section, and I think it is wrong for such people to say holes were picked in the legislation. If anything is picked at all, is a hole in a 185 holes legislation. I leave it to you to know whether there is due diligence if in a 185 legislation, the president only has issue with one section. So if due diligence will be carried out, what do you expect to have occurred? So I think that issue is neither here nor there, and I don't want to join issues with something that is not empirical. But what is empirical is that we have a 185 legislation that the only issue the president had is just one out of 185. What percentage do that in statistics, assuming you want to put it in a statistical model?
The Senate says it will take a position on the president's refusal to sign the bill after consultation with the House of Reps and their constituents. But how is the leadership of the Senate staving off pressure from some political interest opposed to the birth of a new electoral act? Because we know this interest exists.
I don't know what you know. You are the one that say you know. So what I know is that I'm a legislator and I'm not under any pressure. I'm here in my constituency. I'm moving around and doing my work and with my constituents. So I'm not aware there's any pressure on the leadership or any member of the National Assembly. And I've told you, we have put the matter on hold till when we resume. And I've also told you, the options. But if it is to glamorize opinions of people in the paper, opinion at best, may not even be based on reality or on facts.
This January, the country is preparing for massive protests by the organized labor over a proposed increase in pump price of petrol caused by the removal of fuel subsidy. How did the National Assembly, who are representatives of the people, fail to warn citizens to prepare for this looming hard time?
I don't believe that citizens are bracing up for tough times. But when we resume back at the plenary, the issue, when brought up, will be taken up. So I'm not in a position to comment for 180 or for 109 senators who are in disparate, in different locations as of now. So when we resume, we'll take up the issue.
From your assessment of the security situation in the country from the perspective of the Senate, what is the problem? Is it poor funding or a sheer lack of political will or an unwillingness of a tired army and security agencies?
Security issues is a continuous and perennial problem of any society. I don't think there's any society that has gotten itself rid of the problem of insecurity. So what we are doing at the National Assembly is to ensure that we appropriate enough resources to support the fight, on insecurity. And the executive, they're also doing, their best, in that regard. So it's a continuous, process. So in terms of adequate funding, in terms of personnel, we are doing, a lot in that regard. Of course, we're also working on constitutional amendments, which, may necessarily look at the structure and architecture of the Nigerian security and ensure that we have a better approach, to addressing the problem of insecurity. But definitely, security is a key deliverable for any government, and both at the executive and legislative level, we are doing our best to ensure we address the problem of insecurity.
What will be the priority of the Senate when plenary resumes later this month, based on the needs assessment of citizens?
Of course, we'll finalize work on the Electoral Act. It's part of our legislative agenda. And of course, we will continue to interact with the executive and see which areas that we need to make necessary legislative intervention to ensure that we support, the quest for a modernized, economy and address, as we said, the problem of insecurity in the country.
That is our program this week. You can watch this episode again on YouTube. Click on TVC News channel. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching. I am Jesu Adiri. See you next time.